Hi everyone. This is my presentation over considerations for ELL evaluation by Brandy Vinskis. Okay, so let's start with the first question. First question was, students sometimes speak with dialects or differences in language that are related to their culture. What is your professional opinion on how these differences impact assessment approaches in oral language? So I think the first thing that really needs to be noted is that dialect and the differences in the language as they're related to culture, they must be considered when you're looking at the assessment of oral languages. These differences, even if minor, do affect that assessment process, and so that needs to be definitely taken into consideration. Um, so the next thing is um, that these differences that could be lead to like auditory discrimination. So we do have to be aware of assessments that rely on that. Unfortunately, though, for us, there is like no widely accepted standardized technique just for assessing. There are no assessments out there to help us with these dialect differences if you're trying to assess a student. But they do have a couple of options to help you out. They have you can collect like speech samples. The next two are really informal. So it's collecting speech samples and then sentence repetition, which I kind of favor due to the fact that sentence repetition allows for students for the assessor to give a sentence and then see if the student corrects it in their way of using their dialect. It's assuming that they will be able to repeat it, but they will fix it to where it matches their dialect. Uh, so then the one as far as assessments goes that I do like is if you redo testing, and I'm very familiar with the Woodcock Johnson 4, so I could see if I would ever have this that this might come into consideration. So this is some good information for me that we redo formal testing. So like let's say the Woodcock Johnson 4, we'd redo it in two ways. First, I would have to score it like it's supposed to be scored, and then I could also um, rescore it and give mark the answers correct as if they were a dialect, if they would be correct using that student's dialect. Um, Another assessment way that they have listed, I'm not a big fan of for several reasons, is like renorming the test, which is very hard to do. It's very time consuming, and if you don't have enough students or people that fall into this dialect, it would be impossible to even redo. So that's always something to keep in mind, that you've got to look at what do you have available to you. So that's why I do really favor more of the informal, um, because it gives us something that we can use to help just our students, and I think it's just a better way to decide if these differences do impact the student, or not differences impact students, whether it's dialect that, that's why we think that they're doing different or doing, I want to say worse than other kids in their class versus, you know, is there some sort of learning disability, which can also lead to the over and under identification, because some teachers think, well, they're learning, they're English language learners, or that their dialect is causing them to speak this way, So, they don't actually have a learning problem. Whereas the flip side of that is, okay, they're still not getting the hang of it. I think that this dialect is affecting how they learn, so I want them tested. So there's a flip side to that, but in my professional opinion, I'm more for informal assessments, especially since we don't have the assessments available to us. And then if we have to do an assessment, I would go with the reporting the two results. And so it would showing, if there was those differences and if we corrected for those differences. Okay, so question number 2. What intervention options are available to students who are English learners if they need additional services? So a couple of them that I've listed are, for instance, an interpreter in the classroom. I've seen this done before with, it really wasn't an English learner per se. I dealt with a student who was um, deaf, so they used a sign language interpreter to help him. Um, so interpreters are an option, but they are expensive, and you have to find one who is available and qualified to work with a student, and that can be costly, time-consuming, and while you're looking for this interpreter, the student can be missing valuable information, and so you're going to have to just back that all up. The next one I thought was actually pretty cool was the modified seating, because I never really thought about it, but it's redoing seating in your classroom instead of where they're all facing a board. They're actually all grouped together so that they can communicate and talk, and they can get that extra language exposure via their peers. Their peers might be able to, in some instances, help them better than a teacher can. So I'm really like the idea of modified seating. Other schools have gone to specialty teachers or your ESL teachers or your ELL teachers that really help the students and the teachers more with getting them what they need in the classroom and, eventually saying, no, this is not just, an English language learning problem versus, actual disability or even vice versa. They'd be like, no, this is not disability, this is just them learning. So a lot of schools have gone to specialty teachers in that sense. They can also be a little bit costly, and if your need is not great, that can be an issue too. But it's not like we've got a lot of teachers, special education teachers, or even teachers in general who are bilingual. It's very hard to find. So one or a school might want to look at using an ELL teacher or an ESL teacher. There are other modifications that can be made in the classroom that could help the students. So like how things are written, how the teacher talks, making sure to emphasize important things, taking pauses, letting the students catch up, asking and answering questions. So there are some modifications that can be done. And the last question. Why are students who are culturally or linguistically diverse sometimes over or under-identified for special education services? So we'll talk about the under-identified first. And when it comes to being under-identified, the biggest thing is that it's hard to tell the difference between learning problems and learning the English language. They show very similar characteristics. So a teacher might think that, okay, this lag or these learning problems are actually coming from them learning a new language. So there's the differences there. The one I found out about from this chapter and watching the videos, and I didn't really think about it, was actually schools discouraging teachers. And I thought that was really interesting, that schools actually went out of their way to discourage teachers to refer students who possibly need services. In some way, I get the school's point of, it's trying to help with that over-identified, which we'll get to that in a minute, but it's trying to help with that over-identification. but teachers are kind of just told, no, back off, back off. Well, after so many years, though, it's very hard to catch that student up to where they need to be. It and they've missed out on a lot that would have just been just so much more helpful to them. So I think that is really one of the biggest issues is the school discouragement. A lot of teachers also think that they can't really somebody can't really serve ELLs, whether you don't have anybody in your district that can um, do it, or they just don't have you don't have the resources or whatever. And um, the next thing, and I brought it up earlier, was limited bilingual teachers. There's not a whole lot of teachers who are bilingual, and therefore don't really have the ability to serve them, even though that's uh, illegal. But it's just one of the facts that we have that trying to serve these children takes on a whole new difficulty level because we don't have the resources, so they get under-identified. As far as for over-identified students, um, so a lot of teachers won't take into consideration the cultural differences, the exposure to learning that this student has had, um, and just different opportunities. So a student might come in who's had, and I've seen this with students who are English speaking, to where if they've missed a lot of school or have not had the opportunity for school, they are behind. And you can really see it, but that doesn't mean that they're special, like this is an actual disability. It just takes them a little bit longer. They'll get caught up, it just takes them a little longer. Um, Another thing about over-identification is that and this goes back to the first question, we don't have the right assessments. We might have a Spanish assessment. I'll be honest, in my job, I think I've seen one test protocol that we have that was in Spanish, but no book or anything to go, no testing kit or anything that goes with it that's also Spanish. We don't use it. And if we did, if we'd ever have to, it would probably be so old and outdated. Um, so that's a really big issue that we've got is that we just don't have the right assessments that are not they're not specified for this problem of over or under identifying kids that are have different languages. Um, Another thing is, of course, and I've seen this even with just English speaking students, is the special education teacher becomes sort of a dumping ground, as they put it. But it's true. I've seen them they just want to refer all the students they've got because they think that the special education teacher will have the right resources, will have everything that this teacher doesn't have. But that's just not the case. They're still a teacher. They went through most of the same training you did. I, they might be able to help that student, and they might not. You don't know. But we have teachers on both sides that are coming with the fact that they don't know how to serve the student and appropriately, and they don't have the language and instruction, and they're just one person, and so they're like, here we go, I need help, and so they want them identified so that they can get the help that they need to help the student. Uh, so anyway, that's my presentation on what to consider when evaluating a student who is a English language learner and how we can help them in a school system, no matter if they have a disability or not. Thanks for listening.